A lot of people don't know this, but originally I wanted to fly Blackhawks. And it wasn't until after being around all these infantry guys, getting to know them, I switched to wanting to be an Apache pilot because I wanted to be their guardian. And that's how they described it. They shared their stories of these incredible helicopters, these Apaches coming in, being called in, and then feeling safe coming in and protecting them. And I'm like, that is what I want to do. I think a lot of it comes down to, I like to just try new things and take directions and see where they lead me, because you never know where you're going to end up. A lot of that has been driven by thinking that you're on a certain trajectory or path and then having that take you somewhere completely different. Honestly, I think that's where I've gotten to where I am today, is just being willing to follow those other paths and offshoots when things don't necessarily go according to plan. Most plans don't survive first contact, so you have to be flexible. You have to overcome. It boils down to that resiliency. And also you just keep going. You don't just make excuses, you just keep going. I know people get scared, they get nervous thinking that they don't have what it takes or they can't do it, or the easiest way to describe it is you just have to show up. You put yourself outside your comfort zone, you show up and you give it your all.
I'll be bringing Whitney on here in just a little bit. But first, if you're new or watching this as a replay, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. Please subscribe to Defenders Live on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and join our group on Facebook as well. And if you don't want to miss another episode, you can sign up for email notifications at defenders-live.com. This episode is brought to you by Haven Defense Company. Haven Defense Co. is a family-owned holster business based in Colorado. Their top-notch holsters are made on-site by Brent Hickman, and they have a reputation and expertise that I trust so much that I carry in one of their holsters every day. So I highly recommend checking out Haven Defense Co. by clicking in the link in the description below. So let's get right into the interview with Whitney, what you guys all are tuned in for. Raised in Washington State, Whitney Lindsay has been a resident of Texas since getting out of the service in 2017. She's married to a U.S. Army aviation officer who is currently serving, and together they have one son. Whitney has worn two uniforms over the years, first as a U.S. Army aviation officer, and the second as a Wildland Firefighter for BLM and U.S. Forest Service. During her 4 years of service as a Wildland Firefighter, she spent the fire off-season with a civilian company called Heligunner as a flight safety officer and volunteered with Texas Search and Rescue. In 2021, she hung up her fire boots and became the director of operations for Heligunner. And in 2023, she started her own government contract company called Allied Response Incorporated that focuses on two factors: one, wildland fire disaster responses and search and rescue, and two, tactical and military training. In 2024, Whitney started working for Staccato Ranch, the sister company of Staccato 2011, as part of strategic partnerships. Today, she is still director of operations for Heligunner and the CEO of ARI and strategic partnerships with Staccato Ranch. That's a lot. Let's welcome Whitney onto the show. Hey, Whitney.
Hey, it's absolutely a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
I feel a little bit intimidated. I'm not going to lie. That's a lot. You have done so much in your life. You don't look like you're that old. I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but that's a lot to do in a short amount of time.
It is. And it's been one learning experience after another. And honestly, I think a lot of it comes down to, I like to just try new things and take directions and see where they lead me, because you never know where you're going to end up. A lot of that has been driven by thinking that you're on a certain trajectory or path and then having that take you somewhere completely different. Honestly, I think that's where I've gotten to where I am today, is just being willing to follow those other paths and offshoots when things don't necessarily go according to plan.
Yeah, and that's refreshing, because I think that's something we can all relate to no matter what we're doing in life. You have an extraordinary example of that. Could you kind of give us the highlights, I guess, of what path were you kind of thinking you were going to go down and what ended up happening?
No, absolutely. To explain that and to answer that,
I know that's hard.
Accurately, is I'll give you a little bit of my background. So I was married to a service member before I actually entered the service myself. My husband is 7 years my senior, and he actually was a single soldier that I had sent a care package to way back in the day, back when MySpace was still a thing.
Now you're dating yourself.
And then, no, I am. And then they had AOL Instant Messenger. Like, oh no, I'm just going to throw all that out there. People who are under the age of 25 are going to be like, I don't know what any of that means. But trust me, it was gold. But yeah, so I started speaking to my husband because he had taken a career path that I wanted to take. being an Army aviation officer, helicopter pilot, and going to West Point. We started conversing back and forth, and one thing led to another. He was actually deployed to Afghanistan at the time during the surge years, and he came for his R&R out to Seattle to come meet me, and then the rest was history. So
That's crazy.
We got married, and I had taken a break from college to do I'm following you around the country military spouse life. And we ended up having our son, Gavin. Then it was coming back to, okay, got married, spent 3 years married, and then having a toddler. And I'm like, I'm ready to go back to school, go back to college, and then go for my goals, go for my dreams. And so I applied for the University of Washington. So I was a Husky, and then enrolled in their political science program and joined ROTC. So I was in ROTC as a military spouse and also a mom.
That's crazy. Wow.
Brought its own challenges. But so during that time, there was a lot of sacrifice at the family level. My husband ended up getting orders to go early to Leavenworth to go to CGSC, or also known as ILE, which is major school, essentially. And so I turned into a geographically single parent there for a bit, which was challenging. And then vice versa, when I went into my senior year of ROTC, he had our son out there as a geographically single parent. There was a lot of sacrifice along the way. Put in that work. I was an end of camp commissionee in ROTC, and I got my goal, active duty Army aviation. My husband got orders then to deploy overseas, and I had our son, and we packed up, drove out to Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is where Army flight school is. And I was a geographically single parent in flight school. So there were some challenges there too. There was a lot of late nights trying to raise a toddler.
You didn't have any help then?
No help. Partway through flight training, I had a military spouse who lived right next door to me. Her name was Kate, and she was like my rock. She helped me out tremendously. And honestly, I don't know how I would have been able to get through flight school without her, because she was everything. She was so supportive. And it just goes back into that vein of like the importance of military communities. And everyone makes their jokes and their jabs towards military spouses and, but honestly, they are a network. But even for me, who had turned from military spouse into a military officer, the military spouse network was there for me. And so I just want to highlight that, because that meant everything. So I go through flight training, come up to our selection day, which is an order of merit list for those who aren't familiar, and how you do in BOLIC or WOBIC. So if you're a commissioned officer, or if you are a warrant officer and you aren't coming from a National Guard program, people might get confused there. So I'm going to go on a little side tangent there. If you're National Guard and you go to flight training, you already know the aircraft you're going to fly, because the state has sent you there for training.
Okay.
For active duty components, we don't know that. So we have an order of merit list. So on the day of our aircraft selection, we don't know what's going to be up there. It could be nothing but Blackhawks. It could be half Blackhawks, half Apaches, could be some Chinooks, some C-12s. You don't know what you're going to get. And so on my selection day, I selected my dream aircraft, which was the H-64 Apache. That was my selection. Fast forward that, I go through my motions, my career, my progression, and around this time, we also have what's known as the drawdown period. We were losing a lot of service members. The first round to go is we had people with bad paper, essentially people who had gotten in trouble. Then we had people who are permanent profiles, meaning that they might have had medical issues, which made them non-deployable or not be able to go to the field. So it just started kind of going down this list. And during that time, I had some interactions with some fellow Army aviators. One in particular, her actions were not supportive of what the Army values were and what was needed for an Army aviation officer.
And it boiled down to safety, didn't it?
It boiled down to safety. And you try to deal with things at the lowest level. And by dealing with the lowest level means dealing directly with the individual. And I tried to do that. I was warned by my husband. He's like, look, you're a junior officer. You want to fly under the radar. And at the end of the day, I'm also an Army officer. So it's doing things that are uncomfortable, putting yourself out there, but doing what's right. Because ultimately, I need to be able to look at myself in the mirror at the end of the day. And with this particular individual, there was issues with alcohol. There was issues with not knowing the information she needed to be a competent aviator and a safe aviator. She was reckless. She lied. And I remember there was a tipping point for me when it was just like, okay, enough is enough. And that was when she was sharing a dream that she had that she was in combat flying the Apache, that she had fired some shots, right? And then she was like laughing about it, because it was like, oh, I couldn't even disseminate or tell who was on the ground. And she just laughed about it.
Wow.
And for me, that hit really hard because for my background, there were no Army officers or officers of any kind in my family. For my family members who did serve, they were all enlisted. Even though my parents didn't serve directly, I had a lot of other family who did. And my sister married a service member as well. And he was with the 25th Infantry Division back when they were still based out of Fort Lewis, Washington. And he was infantry with the striker units. I grew up right after 9/11. She was dating the service member and ended up getting married. And they were part of that first force that went into Iraq. And so I got to know these guys as a child. Like I met my future brother-in-law at the age of 13, because my sister is older than me. And so I grew up around these guys. And a lot of people don't know this, but originally I wanted to fly Blackhawks. And it wasn't until after being around all these, infantry guys, getting to know them, I switched to wanting to be an Apache pilot because I wanted to be their guardian. And that's how they described it. They shared their stories of these incredible helicopters, these Apaches coming in, being called in, and then feeling safe coming in and protecting them. And I'm like, that is what I want to do. Fly this aircraft, not because it is a badass helicopter, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to fly it because of them. When I'm hearing this information being spoken by this fellow aviator, it struck a nerve down to my core. And I'm like, this isn't right. I dealt with it at the lowest level. Her actions increased. I was asked to come in and make a sworn statement. I didn't want to take that route originally, but at that point it was like, okay, well, and it's no longer a suggestion at that point. So things escalated with her. And she ended up getting a GOMAR, which is a General Officer Memorandum of Reprimand. It's an administrative action for those who aren't familiar. It's not all branches of the service have it, but the Army does. What I didn't realize was the connections that she had beyond our units, beyond everything else, and was retaliated against. And without going into that story too long, because that will take forever to kind of lay all of that out, for a year, I dealt with a lot. I dealt with retaliation. I dealt with harassment. I had to fight tooth and nail for my career and to not be retaliated against. And at the end of the day, I was pulled aside and I'm like, hey, well, we still have this drawdown period going, right? Here you are, junior aviator. You are at high risk for promotion because at this point, my timeline was thrown off by about a year because I didn't get to go into gates that you typically would as a junior officer at that point. And it sucked. So I was told, like, here you go. Here's your honorable discharge. Thanks for playing. Wow. And once again, I fought that tooth and nail, brought in my congressman's office. He tried to work with the Department of the Army, and everyone was the processes were so slow, but that train was already going. It was already in motion. And by the time it got up to the Department of the Army, it was like, well, it is what it is now. And so I got my honorable discharge and I had my military service cut incredibly short. And like I said, there's more to everything that happened in that year. But what it all boiled down to at the end was I wanted to be a lifer, like my husband currently is. I thought I was going to have this as my career. I was going to retire. And I worked my ass off, if I'm being honest, just to be there, and sacrificed a lot.
And your family sacrificed a lot too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when it was all said and done, it was just this feeling of like, what was that all for? Like, what did that all mean? And I was lost. I'm not gonna lie, I was lost. When I got out of the Army in 2017, I'm here at then Fort Hood, now obviously it's Fort Cavazos, but then Fort Hood. And it's just like, what am I going to do with my life? I didn't see things progressing as they did. And so I started volunteering because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was too junior. I had too few hours, as a helicopter pilot to go and like jump right into a commercial job or anything like that. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I started volunteering with two different nonprofits. One was with a veteran nonprofit called Team Rubicon. It's a veteran-based volunteer organization that deals with responding to disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, you name it. They bring in personnel to support logistics and cleanup operations. And then I also found Texas Search and Rescue, or known here as TXR, and started volunteering with them. And it was funny because it was through TXR that I met I don't recall what his actual title was, but it would equate to the director of logistics. So basically he ran all the logistics for TXR, and that was Jeremy. And so Jeremy, I went in and I met him one time by chance, and he was telling me, he found out my background and what I did. And he's like, hey, I own this company called Heligunner. I'm like, Heligunner? I'm like, oh, that's funny. He's like, yeah, we do aerial gunnery. And to me, aerial gunnery means something completely different.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, we do, law enforcement training. And also we have civilians shoot from helicopters. I'm like, wait, what? Like, what is this world? And he's like, okay, I'm going to invite you to come out and just come check it out. Like, humor me, come check it out. I'm like, okay, well, I'm intrigued. You're talking my language, helicopters and
Sure.
guns. Sure. Like, and that's how I got roped into being a flight safety officer. I went out there, I saw it go a couple times. He's like, okay, and go, Whitney. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're in this.
Awesome.
I ended up just really enjoying it. Because like I said, I was free floating essentially at this point.
Right.
I didn't know what I was going to do. And then I get this other call. Hey, there's a trial program coming up with Team Rubicon. We're in a partnership negotiation phase with the Bureau of Land Management, or commonly known as BLM, about trying to create veteran-only wildland firefighters. So basically, wildland fire crews that were only veteran. That's probably the more eloquent way to put that. Just had to make that overly complicated explaining
It's
that.
okay, I do that all the time.
But, and I don't know what it was. I just, it's like, oh, wildland firefighting. That sounds interesting. I am free floating still out here in the void, essentially. Sure, I'll go check it out. And I went there. I had no idea. I guess I didn't read this part of the email notification, but that was getting started with your red card to be certified to actually go and become a wildland firefighter. And I was like, oh, I thought I was just like getting information. No, I'm in a red card cert program. I'm like, okay, well, wow. Here I am. And I went through that program, agreed to be on call. So basically we were on reserve, but on call throughout that first fire season. And I dispatched to my very first fire within like a month of completing this red card cert. And
which you could totally handle, by the way.
Yeah, I was just like, it was like drinking, like no pun intended, from a fire hose. I'm like, okay, well, here we are. Like 1 month ago, I never even considered the track of wildland fire. And then I show up to what I thought was an information course. It was more than that. And now I'm out here on a fire in California up by Yosemite National Park. Yeah.
I just have to say, I love this about life. I know that you went through some incredible hardships, both in sacrifice through your family and through what happened to you in the Army, which is a whole other, I mean, that could be a whole 2-hour thing by itself. But the fact that you landed where you landed, again, no pun intended, is remarkable to me and gets me excited, because so many times in our lives, things will happen and we will dwell on the thing that we're fixated on, that we think is the thing that we're supposed to do.
Right.
And then somehow there's a big twist in the road and you get turned into this other direction and you just feel like confused, lost, overwhelmed. And what I love about you is that you just like said, okay. Let's try that instead of pulling back. You know what I mean? And just like giving it a go. And then look what happened.
Thank you. That means a lot to hear. I think honestly, at the end of the day, it comes down to not closing yourself off and closing down opportunities. Because when I got out, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I got into a dark place there for a little bit. And I knew the only way I was going to pull myself out of it was like just putting myself out there, not shutting down, closing off, and trying something new, even if it's something I'd never considered before. Yeah. And I tell you what, that was not a practice I held prior to everything that had happened.
Really?
Like I was very much like dictated, like this is the path. There was no deviations. There was no time for other things. And since then, it's the amount of opportunities that come from just being like open and willing to try new things and to reinvent yourself and not painting yourself into a box where that becomes your sole identity. It really is amazing. Highly recommend it, you know?
Yeah. And you actually were equipped for what was put in front of you, were you not? Or at least mostly equipped, and you could learn what you needed to learn?
Oddly enough, I think there's so many things in the military, regardless if you were a refueler or a logistician or a pilot or infantryman, that is a baseline that can set you up for success, whether it's working for another government agency or in the civilian world. And part of that is just, it's going to sound so corny, because you know what's going to happen is we're going to have veterans listening to this and they're going to be like, oh God, she's going to start saying Army values, isn't she? No, I'm not. I'm going to spare you guys from that. But it teaches you to adapt. It teaches you to understand that most plans don't survive first contact. So you have to be flexible. You have to overcome. It boils down to that resiliency. And also you just keep going. You don't just make excuses. You just keep going. And so jumping into Wildland Fire, that's what it was. It's like, okay, that's just go. And it's a very fast pace. It's a very fast paced field. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot going on. And I know the Army 100% set me up for that. And being surrounded that first fire season with fellow veterans also helped, because we spoke each other's languages. And there was that sense of familiarity and community that we all brought over from the service that was able to help transition us into fire, which I thought was pretty amazing. So that helped me tremendously as well.
Yeah, that's just who you are. I mean, obviously, I don't know if that's who you've always been. I think it probably is, but that's just who you are. And it's obvious. And those types of people, no matter what is thrown at them, will adapt and overcome. And that is really the name of the game at the end of the day. It doesn't matter whether you're in the military or not. But that is why I admire you. I initially admired you because cool, she's a helicopter pilot. Who wouldn't think that's cool? But when I researched you a little bit deeper, I'm like, no, she's legit like a person of good moral character and someone who has a lot of grit and a lot of resiliency. And I admire that about you more than I do any kind of title you could have. And that's the message that I want to send to other women that might be watching this. We need more women like that in whatever field and industry, whether it's in the firearms industry or aviation or whatever, because what we're going out in the world and setting out to do and being of service to others, like, boils down to, if you don't have that moral integrity and that resiliency and that grit, you're never going to move the needle. Part of my job, I feel like, in my calling as a firearms instructor is to just start finding and building those women and men, but mostly women, that gravitate towards what I do. Yeah. And giving them a hand up and being like, hey, actually, you can do this. Actually, you do have what it takes. And that's incredibly hard for some women because a lot of them come into in the firearm space because something really bad has happened to them. And they're saying, I'm never going to let something like that ever happen to me again. They kind of need an advocate. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
I love that. And I love that that's what you are helping women to find, is essentially you're advocating for them to find their voice and take their power back. And I think that's great. And no, I agree. Getting more women into the 2A industry or into the military or aviation or fire or all of those things, I think is wonderful. And I know people get scared. They get nervous thinking that they don't have what it takes or they can't do it. Or the easiest way to describe it is you just have to show up. You show up. You do. Yes. You put yourself outside your comfort zone. You show up and you give it your all. And you are going to have people that you encounter that just don't like you. They don't like you. And you have to be okay with that as well. It's like, I can't make everyone happy. I can't please everyone. Not everyone is going to see my hard work. Yeah. And take that for what it is. And you got to be okay with that. For me in the Army, when I made the choice I made to say something, I knew that there was a chance of retaliation. But like I said, I also knew I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. If she killed herself, killed her, her flight buddy, her stick buddy, because it's a 2-pilot aircraft for all the aircraft the Army has, or kill someone on the ground that was friendly. Because of incompetence and lack of discipline, which I say those words because that's honestly what I saw was lack of competence and lack of discipline and lack of moral character too. Obviously I'm holding nothing back there, all my thoughts, but it's,
I love that.
When I did, I had a couple comments that were directed towards me, like, oh, this is why women shouldn't be in the service because they're emotional. It's just like, so, and like, I had one individual who had said this to me and I looked at him in the face and I said, okay, so if you had saw this from a fellow guy and you said absolutely nothing, and then they got a fellow service member killed based on things that you saw, would you still be like, oh, I shouldn't have said anything? He's like, well, and he starts backpedaling. It's like, yeah, you take the gender out of that,
right, and
just look at the values of it, what's right. And that's okay. When people make comments like that, I don't care. And that's one thing, like any women who are listening to this, like, you show up, you put in your best effort, you be okay with not being everyone's friend and not everyone liking you, but also having your own moral compass and your ethics and sticking to it and knowing that at the end of the day, people are going to say what they're going to say, but you can still look at yourself in the mirror, and that can be scary. I get that, but
it's the right thing to do.
But it's the right thing to do, and that keeps you going forward. It keeps you from
that's you running your own race, though. That's what that is.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into something I want to get into, because for me, I don't want to call it a gateway drug, but I think an incredibly great inoculation into learning how to show up and how to do hard things and having discipline in your life is through fitness.
Yes.
I think that is one of the most perfect ways to learn who you are, what you're capable of, and learn more about yourself and grow as a person. And I don't just mean physically, right? Yes. What I've learned, and I started doing CrossFit type exercises, I guess. It's been almost exactly a year now. And prior to that, I had just dabbled. I'd gotten on the wagon and off the wagon, on the wagon, off the wagon for years and years and years. And I could not figure out for the life of me what the root cause was of me just not being able to commit to it. And what I realized finally was that it boiled down to discipline. It had nothing to do with motivation and everything to do with discipline. And it's really funny because growing up, I had one of the best examples of discipline in my life. My dad is a rancher. And as you know, when you grow up on a ranch, you have animals to take care of. And it does not matter what the weather is. It does not matter how you feel about what needs to be done. It gets done. No matter what, you show up and do the work. And so I had a great role model of that growing up, and I have a strong work ethic, but for some reason I hadn't connected the dots, and for something just kicked in last year for whatever reason. I don't know what it was. And I just started showing up. No matter what I felt like, I just started showing up. And at first it was in really small ways, but as I grew, I think in character and really just keeping promises to myself, this is what I think people don't get, is that doing the right thing isn't necessarily having to do with other people.
Right.
At first, it begins with you.
Yep.
It begins with you having integrity and making promises to yourself and keeping them and following through with things to yourself. And then that expands slowly and it has a ripple effect in every other aspect of your life. And so that's what fitness showed me, is just showing up and doing the work, whatever that hard is for you that day, right? And being honest about that and not cheating a rep and not, just because like there's
speaking my language. Yes.
Yeah. There's just all these things that you see. And I used to go to classes too, CrossFit classes. And you could see immediately those people that are the type of people that will cheat a rep or that will make excuses or that are always late or that, you know what I'm saying? They're that way in every other aspect of their life. It's just like a microcosm of everything else. And so I guess the point I'm making is that you don't have to be an Apache helicopter pilot to be a badass. You can be a badass wherever you are in your life. And maybe that might be a good way to start. For you, has fitness always been a part of your life? And what would you say to encourage others that maybe that's not a part of their life yet? Do you think that might be helpful to entertain, perhaps?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Fitness is a major aspect of my life right now. I work out 5 to 6 days a week. I'm an avid CrossFitter. I'm also a distance runner. Fitness, quite literally, I have attributed it to saving my life in more than one way. There's multiple facets there, but it wasn't always that way for me. Growing up, I hiked. I grew up in Washington State. We hiked and we did snow sports, water sports, things like that. But as far as working out, that was never part of my repertoire.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I went to go join the Army that I started treating fitness as a stepping stone or a necessity for military service. It was something that just needed to be done. I didn't have the mindset then that I do now that I actually needed it to mean something more to me than other than a block check. When I was fit in the Army, back when we had our APFT, like I would always score like anywhere between like 290 to a 300, which 300 was max. And at that time when we had that fitness scale, and I was like, okay, good. We're checked. We're good to go. That's what I needed to do. And it wasn't until getting out of the service that during that free floating time, right? Mm-hmm. Where I'm like, I need something. I need an outlet. Because at that moment, I was still dealing with some anger. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like how I got out, how things happened, even though I got to taste my dream, which that's what it felt like. I got to taste it. I got to touch it. I got my honor roll, but like, that wasn't good enough. That's not how I saw it. And so I got out angry and I like, you know what? I tried CrossFit before. My husband had actually introduced me to it back when we were dating and had done it kind of off and on throughout the years, but just never dedicated myself to it because the tempo of work and family just didn't line up. So I was like, I felt like I was training more for a PT test than I was for anything else. Because once again, I treated fitness as a block check. Well, now it's not a block check anymore for me. I started going to CrossFit and it opened up a couple different things for me. One, it gave me a foundation to build from where I was able to have a stress release to help kind of work that anger off. The sadness that comes from the loss of something that you really care about, it brings you that peace and that high, that happiness that comes with, getting a PR or a good solid WOD in. But also it gave me that sense of community that had also just kind of been ripped away from me, or at least that's how it felt at the time. Because I had like a really good CrossFit gym here at Fort Cavazos that was just really welcoming. It also gave me, and I want to pull off a point that you mentioned earlier, it gave me those little goals to work towards. Like when I first showed up, I couldn't do a pull-up. I didn't have to for the fitness test, right? Remember I said I did that as a block check. So now I show up and I'm like, I want to do a strict pull-up.
Mm-hmm.
So I start working towards that goal, just that little tiny goal. And then once I got it, it's like, okay, I want to do double unders with a jump rope. And so it built my confidence and I got stronger working on one little goal at a time. And psychologically, getting those did so much for me because it built confidence, right? I got stronger. It built my confidence back up and it made me look at fitness as more of a tool for me to keep my mind body in balance compared to just a requirement for a job. When I got into wildland firefighting, fitness and CrossFit had transformed even more because, I mean, let's be real, as a pilot, there's not a lot of physical things that you're doing.
Right.
The biggest thing that I was going to see, and this is a, heaven forbid situation, was if we went down as a 2-pilot aircraft and my co-pilot was incapable of moving his or herself, I needed to be able to bring them out to safety.
Mm-hmm.
In wildland fire, you're accountable to the guys and gals next to you. You need to not be a risk to them, to where they have to get you out because you're incapable of it yourself. It's one thing if you're, incapacitated because something has happened, but like if you just can't because you're not fit,
mm-hmm.
you're putting their lives at risk.
Right.
And then if they can't get themselves out because something has happened and I am not physically fit to help, I'm putting their lives at risk too, and my own, to get home to my family.
Mm-hmm.
And so then fitness changed into that necessity, that mind shift, not just a block check.
Oh my gosh, that reminds me of a story. Sorry.
No,
I do this sometimes.
No, I like this.
Can I tell you a story?
Yes.
Okay. This reminds me of something. So you're talking about giving purpose to fitness. Yes. I started training with a weight vest recently, and running is not my favorite thing to do, but I do it. I was assigned to run, I don't know, I think it was like 4 rounds of half mile or something like that. And I was supposed to wear the weight vest for the first 2 rounds and then take the weight vest off and run the last 2 rounds, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I got so in my head about what my game plan was. I ran the first and I was on a treadmill. I ran the first 2 rounds on the treadmill. No, the first 3. And I got to the 4th one and I realized I had forgotten, I didn't follow directions and I'd forgotten to put the weight vest on for the first 2 rounds. And I was so mad at myself that I went and cinched that puppy on and I went outside in the heat because I hate running outside. It's so much easier to run on a treadmill, Whitney.
It is. As someone who has a treadmill in my garage, yes.
Yes. Okay. So I was like, okay, you didn't follow directions. So you were going to put that weight vest on for the 4th and final round when you're tired, and you were going to run your butt outside on the hills instead of the flat treadmill inside where it's temperature controlled. So I went out on the 4th round. And I knew it was going to suck, right? I knew it was going to suck, but because it was all uphill the first half. I got like halfway there and I turned around to run home for the last half. And I was just, because this is exercising, right? And you're not supposed to run kind of fast, but like, whatever, right? All of a sudden, do you know what I did? I thought, what if my kids were in my house right now and the house was on fire? How fast would I be running then? Ooh. Would I care that I'm out of breath right now? What would I actually do? Could I get to them? Or would I die trying? Like, could I actually get there? And I've got this weight vest on. I'm thinking, would I maybe? Right. But that shift in my purpose and my perspective took my pace from, I don't know what it was, but it pretty much doubled my pace because I literally all of a sudden had a different energy in my body. Yes. And I went, oh my God, I have to get there now. And so I did. I ran my little self all the way down as fast as I could really go, not just fast because I was working out. And when I got back to the house, I could not breathe. I had a cramp somewhere in my belly that I've never had before.
Oh, the side stitch.
It wasn't the side, it was the front, which was,
it was in the front.
Like under my rib cage in the front. I don't know what it was, but it was like making me cough almost because it hurt so bad to breathe. All that to say is that when you put a different kind of mindset into what you're doing, you can change everything about what you're doing. And so I guess for those people out there that are watching this, because this is Defenders Live, right? This isn't just about defending yourself physically, even though we're talking about physical right now. We're talking about mental and spiritual and all the things about being a defender in all ways in your life. Like if you're going to get serious about fitness and you want to be a concealed carrier, you want to improve your physical fitness because maybe your house is on fire, or maybe you have to run to an active shooter, or whatever the case may be, like put that into your daily training and actually try to, when you're shooting at a target on a static range and you put movement into it, think about what that means in that moment. Have context behind what you're actually doing. And it will literally transform the way you train, I think, just from my perspective.
Absolutely. So I'm really glad that you brought that story up, because one thing from shooting perspective, once again, aviation background.
Yeah.
That's what I was. I have competed several times in what is called the tactical games.
Oh my gosh,
so it's like a fusion of like CrossFit and like some strongman stuff and shooting all rolled up into one. And one of the things that I found was firing under duress, right? Is a very, very different thing from standing on a static line.
Yeah.
But that is also life. So if you're defending yourself, like there's an active shooter situation, right? Fitness also plays a role into that, to be able to control your breathing and your body in that moment. So I started doing a lot more working out and shooting. Once again, that purpose driven, you know, to be able to defend myself and my family, because that's how things are going to be. It's not going to be on a static line. Like there's a time and a place for that kind of training, you know, for familiarization and all the drills and things. But there's also something to be said about training with a purpose like that.
It's more fun too.
It is. And boy, is it humbling.
Oh yeah, it's humbling. But I'm so excited that you brought that up, because that is actually one of my goals. I want to compete in the tactical games at some point. So
I've only ever competed in the teams division. And here's the thing. I love the teams division because you're with someone else. It can either be mixed gender, so guy, girl, or girl, girl, guy, guy, doesn't matter. And you're at intermediate weights, but there's something to be said about going through that with another human being. And I don't have a lot of spare time. I don't get to shoot as much as I like. I do work out a lot. But finding that time to always get in and shoot and be like one of the top, to be in like the female elite, I don't have that allotment right now in my life. So teams division is where it's at for me. And so I highly recommend to anyone who is thinking about tactical games, consider trying the teams division, especially if you're like, I'm not ready. Look, teams division is great. It is a great introductory. It builds your confidence and also gives you something like a basis of comparison. Like, okay, these are the things I need to work on. And trust me, after my first one, I was like, okay, I got some things I need to work on.
Yeah.
So I'm just tossing that out there. Consider teams.
Okay, that means I need a buddy. I'm sure there's somebody out there that will want to compete with me. I wonder if Adam would do it.
You should.
I couldn't keep up with Adam though. There's no way.
It doesn't matter. You're in it. You're in it as a team.
Yeah, but I don't want him doing all the work.
No, they distribute. They make sure things are distributed. Oh yeah.
Okay.
And so like there's guy and gal weights too. So like it's not, or you get to work together for weights. So they do a fantastic job about that. But no.
I almost signed up for Idaho this year. I was this close, but I didn't. So anyway, I figure I need at least another year under my belt before, because they raised the minimum requirements for the intermediate. So when they did that, and I wasn't even barely like ready for what used to be intermediate, I'm like, oh no, I'm not ready yet. And then Adam goes, just go and fail. I'm like, failing is one thing, but hurting yourself is another. So I'm willing to fail, but I'm not willing to get hurt because it's too expensive.
Well, now you can drag Adam out there and be like, Adam, you can fail with me.
Right.
Come with me. No, you guys will do great. I think you should though.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. All right. I'm not sure where to go from here, but I want to ask you this question, and maybe nothing will come of it, but I'm curious. Okay. I want to know what drives you.
Ooh, that's also a good question. Don't quite know how to answer that. It's very like,
because a lot of people don't even know what drives them.
I think if I was to try to put it into words, it's most likely a combination of several different factors. One, it's proving to myself that I can do it. You know, I had a good childhood, and I had aspects about my childhood that weren't that great. You know, it was a mixed bag, if I'm being honest. So part of that is overcoming those aspects that weren't good. Being like, hey, I can do it. Having that purpose. Another part of it is probably staying busy. Keeping busy and having purpose keeps me mentally in a good place. When I didn't have purpose for that time period after leaving the service, you know, I was not in the best place mentally. Having purpose put me in a better space, and being in a better space, having that purpose gave the best possible version of myself to my family. So to be better for them, having that purpose and that drive. I would say the third thing is, since going through this journey and being open enough to share the aspects of it that aren't the Hollywood picture perfect things, you know, no one typically talks about the things that happened in the military that weren't just the glory, you know, of like a combat tour or this or that. Like they don't always talk about these other factors, right? The other things that can happen. Being open about that. A lot of people have opened up directly to me, sharing their own stories.
Yeah.
And being open and putting yourself out there like that and being open to receive information from others has given me a perspective and a purpose of a different kind to want to create a space for my brothers and sisters who wore the uniform to go to continue having their sense of purpose. And that's why I started ARI, Allied Response Inc. And so that drove me. So I know that that's kind of like a long-winded response, and it's
well, we all
like I
have
said,
multiple factors to drive us.
Yeah. And that's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah. I think for me, a lot of what it is for me right now, what drives me, honestly, is curiosity. Because I just wonder, like, what can I do? Like, I think that the growth I've experienced over the last couple of years since, joining Defenders has kind of been a jumping off point of, whoa, I didn't think that could happen. I didn't know I could do that.
Yeah.
And so that just kind of opens the next door and the next door and the next door. And then you meet someone else new. And the show too has done that, because I've been able to interview some really amazing people. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think that you're right. Finding other people and sharing stories with other people and opening up in a way that is authentic really is, I think, one of the biggest gifts that you can give other people. And in return, opens up, like I said, new opportunities in ways you didn't realize. And, you and I and everyone else who's putting ourselves out there, I think affect people in ways we don't even realize. And so what we say and how we say it and being who we truly are is really important. And that's something I take really seriously, because I think just being a version of ourselves is way too hard of work anyway. So you might as well.
Right. Just be you.
Yeah. Right.
And people can tell too. People
they
can tell when you're being genuine or when you're wearing the mask. I think everyone thinks they're a lot more clever than they are in that regard, but people notice that.
Yeah. And I wear everything on my sleeve anyway, so I might as well just be real.
My facial expressions alone. I can't wear a mask. This is why I can't play poker.
I can't either.
It's just not the thing I can do.
That's funny. So let's end on, I do want to talk about the future for you, what your goals are for the future. But before we do that, you had mentioned that you were passionate about finding balance. And I actually, I want to respectfully maybe disagree. I'm not sure if balance is ever possible. I am extremely passionate, and I've noticed throughout my life that I have thought that I needed to try to find balance, but I don't think I ever have. I think that I have been fueled by passion in many ways that has led me down unexpected paths. And that's part of the being curious. I think it is just this journey of exploratory, things that are really exciting. But as far as balance goes, I think the only way that I could equate that in my life is that I did come to a point, maybe of maturity, where I decided to take my life back, my time back. My priorities are very clear and my time management is very clear. I decided to take control of my days rather than letting the days control me, which really amounted to letting other people control me, because people always want your time. They always want something from you constantly. And you have to be able to not only take control, but maintain control of your days so that you can have time for your family, so that you can have time for working out or whatever is a priority in your life. Have you found that to be the case for you as well?
So balance, work-life balance to me is like perfection. You will never be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I agree. There will never be a perfect work-life balance,
Mm-hmm.
but all we can do is chase it. There's ebbs and flows, right? So
Seasons.
There are times where I feel like I have got things figured out and they're together. I am getting 7 to 8 hours a night of sleep. I am not looking at an inbox that has like 30 unread messages. Everything is just lined up. And then life comes in there and says, hey, we got a surprise for you, and it throws a wrench in there. And then you have to adjust course, right? So things get thrown out of balance again, and then you try to bring yourself back on. And the biggest thing that I have found for work-life balance, and this comes back to and maybe I'm reaching a bit too much here, but I think as women, it can be really hard to say no sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that I have found is saying no, or I can't do that, to guard my time, because I was saying yes and spreading myself way entirely too thin. And there were so many people around me in my life, professionally, personally, who were all, and to them, it wasn't, well, probably to the majority of them, it would probably seem pretty simple or harmless. Like, oh, I just need you to create this product for me, or make this introduction, or meet me for lunch, or go with me to this. But like, they were all these little things, but boy, did they add up.
Oh, yeah.
And then there wasn't a lot of time for me. And the one thing I would jealously guard in my life is, being able to have dinner with my family and then going to the gym and getting my gym time. Because once again, trying to be the best version of myself, that helps with that. It helps my family as well. It wasn't until I was sitting there, I'm like, I'm getting like 4 to 5 hours a night of sleep. I'm stressed. I have no time. I am all over the place. I am helping everyone else fill their cup while they are taking away from mine, and nothing is being refilled into it, into my cup. And I had to start saying, no, I can't do this. Or no, I can't do this now, negotiating or not negotiating, stating, right, for a time that's better for me in my situation, and feeling comfortable and confident enough to do that. Yeah. That was not always the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I know a lot of people that struggle with that.
Yeah.
I know so many people that are being like, they wake up in the morning, and I mean, because I used to be this person.
Yeah.
Wake up in the morning and like not really have a plan, kind of knowing what you sort of want to do, but it didn't end up turning out that way. And then you just go with whatever the flow of life and the day and everything goes with. And for me, I just can't operate that way anymore. It just doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for my family. And who I become in that process is someone I don't even recognize. And it's just not worth it. I don't know, really, I can't tell you a turning point. And maybe it was a slow progression over time. And again, maybe it had to do with maturity or stepping more into who I really am, finding out who I really am and knowing that. And like you said, being confident about it. But I do see other people that I know that operate the way that I used to. And it's really hard to see. And because you can't a lot of times tell somebody something and it makes it's like they know intellectually, but they haven't committed to it in their heart.
I wonder if part of that is almost like that worry, that fear. You tell people no, you set those healthy boundaries, because part of finding that confidence to say no, or, to limit the amount of times you say yes, and putting those boundaries in place is prioritizing in your life what matters most. Like there's my family, there are my friends, there's work. Those are different spheres and they all take time. I only have so many hours in the day. You only have so many hours in the day. Whatever time allotment we make for any of those factors takes away from all the rest. So you got to prioritize. And to do
and
that.
Not only that, you need to be present during that time.
Oh, absolutely.
Like it's one thing to schedule out your day, but if you're running around, okay, it's all scheduled out, but I'm not there.
Oh yeah. If I'm staring at my phone responding to emails, but I'm sitting next to my son, am I there with my son? No.
Right.
No, I am not.
Right. Yeah.
But I will say this. It is such an interesting thing when you start saying no, seeing the genuine people in your life, and then the ones who are so used to you saying yes, just slowly
they kind of leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just kind of let themselves out, don't they?
Yep. That's so true. Yeah. So it is better. And, it's just like anything else in life. Usually the thing that's harder to do is the right thing to do. And you've demonstrated that, because the path that you took, the right thing to do was the hardest thing. I mean, you fought tooth and nail to go through all the right channels, to do the right things. Yeah. Honestly, though, I think it's so cool that it happened the way that it did. I mean, do you ever look back and be like, well, actually, this has been kind of a cool ride,
Yeah. And that's the thing is, there was a moment in there where I couldn't see the forest beyond the trees because I was so fixated on that one focal point. And where I am, nowhere where I pictured.
Yeah.
But the connections, the relationships I've made, the experiences I've been able to have, I'm very grateful for it. And the person that I left the military being versus the person I was when I first entered, I like the version of me now because I found my voice. I did find my confidence, though she wasn't there right away. But also it gave me things like perspective and compassion and open-mindedness, which I didn't know how strong the open-mindedness and compassion portion necessarily were prior to me experiencing the things that I did. Because once you experience things directly for yourself, it's like, whoa, it's so easy to dismiss things in your mind, being like, oh, well, so-and-so deserved that, or, oh, there must be more to that story. Like you explain things off because it makes you uncomfortable.
Right.
It's just easy to do. But then when you deal with something firsthand, you're like, whoa, life is, it's a bit more complicated than it seems. And so it's giving me that ability to look at things differently for other people too. And I don't think I would have had that otherwise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. What a gift. What a gift. And now you can be a gift to others. I mean, know that don't you have a mentoring program, or at some point you did some mentoring?
Yeah, I was part of a women's aviation mentorship group, and
That's cool.
so I brought in the little bit of the military piece, but also the wildland fire perspective. So I never flew for the Bureau of Land Management or the U.S. Forest Service, but I did help to call in aviation assets, and I was part of their helicopter crew member course, so the HECM
Mhm.
course, and so kind of guiding women in fire through that regard as more of a boots on the ground perspective.
Yeah,
And it was a lot of fun.
that's
It was
cool.
so neat to watch these young women on their journey from getting their private pilot's license to some of them going all the way up through their certified flight instructor or CFI, and
Yeah,
kind of follow them on their journey. Yeah,
that's
no, I
cool.
love that.
But what's in the future for you, Whitney? What are you
That
working on
is
right now? And
a
what
great
are you,
question.
yeah, what are your goals for the future?
So ultimately, my goal is, so I wear my three hats right now. I've got my Heligunner, I've got ARI, and I've got Staccato Ranch. And they all complement each other fairly well, all within those same spheres. Ultimately, my goal is to lean in hard into my government contract company, to take all of my passions from aviation to military to wildland fire to search and rescue and marry them together into a space where those of us who have served can go and continue service, to have that sense of community, to have that sense of purpose again,
Hmm.
in a way to give back, because there's a few of us, we just don't fit well into the civilian molds of
Yeah,
office spaces and
yeah.
things, and I really want to lean heavily into that and to be able to build the company up to a point where I can start giving back and following some of my other passions. So I'm very passionate about a couple key topics. I do not have the full resources or the financial backing to follow some of these, but the goal with ARI is to reallot some of those resources and funds to some of these other projects. But for me, I'm very passionate about saving children from child sex trafficking.
Mm.
And so ultimately, I want the company to shift into that as well and to create a offshoot where we can do that.
Hmm.
And so that's where I see things going, is building up that contract company and being able to go and give back to the community and help make a difference. And I know it probably sounds corny, but like
No,
it's
it
it's
sounds
that
remarkable.
purpose. So
Sounds remarkable. And I have no doubt in my mind that you will absolutely do it, whatever you set your mind to.
well, thank you.
Because you've proven to yourself over and over that's what you do. So why would this be any different, right?
Thank you. It's very kind of you.
So then where can people learn more about you if they want to check out what you're doing or help you out, perhaps?
Well, if they want to learn more, I guess the best place would be social media in that regard.
Okay.
I post a lot through our companies. So if you're on Facebook, we are Heligunner, as well as X. Still used to calling it Twitter, by the way. I'm
Mhm.
having a hard time calling it X. And Instagram, we are Heligunner Actual. Which, funny story about that, we are Heligunner Actual only on Instagram because an employee started Heligunner, lost the login information, and Meta has not been helpful about
That
recovering
happens
it.
more than you realize.
Yeah. Allied Response Inc. is also on our Instagram as well as on X. And then I've got my personal accounts if anyone would like to follow. My Facebook is locked down. Sorry, everyone. That's my personal friends and family one. But I do have my Instagram, which is Lindsay Whitney. So Linz and then Whitney, as well as on X. So you can follow our adventures there and kind of learn more. ARI is a newer company, so we're still developing that. The website's still in development there, but
Okay.
we do have some exciting things coming for next year for 2025 to look out for.
Mm,
Yeah,
cool. Well, when you decide to announce that, just come back on the show and announce it there.
absolutely. Well, we do have one. I'm gonna tease this.
All
We're
right.
actually doing a trial run for ARI and 3 other women-owned businesses that are within
Oh,
the 2A or defense industry. We're going to be doing a trial run here towards the end of the year for a women's only event here in Texas. So I'm just going to throw
no,
that out there.
no.
There's a much more details to come, but that is what we're doing.
That's
We could
too
get you
vague,
down there
Whitney.
for it.
That's too
We
vague.
It is vague. You know what?
Mm.
You should come down there for it. I'm just saying.
I don't even know what it is, but sign me up. If you think I could do whatever the thing is, I'll do it. That would be fun.